Hi, welcome everyone. So great you can all join us today. I'm Kath Young. I'm a technology lead here at Portable, working with our technologists to deliver quality software projects. And our intention in today's webinar is just to give you some things to think about and to share our perspectives, but not really to give answers, just raise some questions and give you some material for reflection. We're going to be talking about the use of AI in technology. We're looking at how we use AI as a tool to produce software rather than writing AI ourselves. And this is the second in a series of 3 Portable talks on ChatGPT and the use of AI in our work. In March, our design team looked at harnessing AI for human-centered design. And if you missed that, there's going to be a link in the chat. And joining me today is Rick Measham. Hi, Rick.
Good, Kath. Hi, folks. I'm Rick Measham, also a technology leader here at Portable and head up our technology practice. During today's presentation, we'll also be meeting some of the other members of the Portable technology team, both on the call and in chat, where Ellie will be dropping in some links to the things we're talking about. So if you want to follow up on some things, you'll find the links will be in the chat there. In the chat, you'll also find Madison using the tag Portable Training and Events. If you're having any technical issues, send him a DM. And then after the presentation, Madison will also make sure that a recording is available to everyone who's registered. And you can share that link too.
Yep, and we're interested in hearing from you throughout the event. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom to send us a question. It should be just down in your chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end. But we do primarily want to stick to talking about the use of AI in doing our jobs rather than getting too bogged down in the technicalities of how AI works.
And Kath, while we're talking about some amazing new technology today, we of course want to first acknowledge the oldest continuing culture on Earth. Kath and I are hosting today from the lands of the Kaurna people around Adelaide and the Woodworking people of Melbourne southwest, and we acknowledge their connection to the lands and waters which we visit upon in our work. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who are with us today. If you know whose lands you're on today, I'd invite you to mention their traditional owners in chat as a way of joining our acknowledgement. This always was, and it always will be, Aboriginal land.
Thanks, Rick. We'd also just like to signpost and be clear that while tools like ChatGPT can be and are being used to generate swathes of content and for things like webinars like this one in today's event, all of this content is 100% human generated.
It sure is. We tried to get ChatGPT to admit that there might be some ethical or legal considerations in its use in technology, but it refused to answer.
So rude.
Totally. Kath, AI has been a dream for many years. And so let's rewind, if we can, and go back to Alan Turing, the guy who built the computer that managed to hack the German Enigma machines in World War II. You might have seen
That's a large rewind, Rick.
Yes, going back a long way. You might have seen the Benedict, what's his name, movie, The Imitation Game, a few years back that told a fictionalized version of his story. He's famous for what we now call the Turing test. He, of course, didn't call it that. He called it the Imitation Game. Now, for years, this has been like the benchmark for artificial intelligence. Can you just walk us through, outline for us what the Turing test is and how it's relevant to what we're looking at today?
Sure, Rick. Well, like you said, it has long been a benchmark, a standard in the development of artificial intelligence. And it essentially is designed to measure how well a given AI program can fool a user into believing that they're interacting with another person instead of a machine during a natural language conversation like the one we're having today. So users are given a way to chat with both people and machines without knowing which one they're talking to. And if they're able to carry on a natural language conversation through that interface without being able to reliably identify this person's the person and this person's the machine, then the machine's considered to have passed that Turing test.
That sounds like my experience with ChatGPT. I'm not sure about you. I'm not sure about everybody we've got in the chat today, but I know when I have tried playing with ChatGPT, I feel like I need to be polite.
Right?
Please and thank you, even though I know that it's the machine I'm talking to. In the Turing test, you're not sure which one you're talking to. In this, I know it's the machine, and I'm still being polite. So I wonder, does that mean that ChatGPT is intelligent?
Look, intelligent is a really hard word to use. And look, I'd like to put this question out to the chat. And if you could throw in for us your answer to these two questions. What is intelligence? And how can we tell if something is intelligent? So Rick, while people are doing that, let's just have a quick chat about ChatGPT from a technical point of view. I know I said we weren't going to get too bogged down here, but it's a useful foundation for the rest of our discussion, because we keep hearing the words large language model coming up in these discussions. Could you just give us a layperson's overview of what a large language model is?
I'll give it my best shot. So a large language model is essentially a computer program that's learned the patterns and structures of human language. Let's call it the form of human language. Without going to the ones and zeros of how it's actually programmed, it creates a probability model of what words come next after what it's already produced. But it's really important to realize that form and meaning are two different things. Form means that it knows what the most plausible next word would be in a given circumstance, whereas meaning means that it understands the content. And
yeah, that's an important differentiation.
Yeah, and you're talking about the Turing test, and I think the Turing test is all about form and not about meaning. There's a well-known paper called On the Dangers of Stochastic Parrots that talks about this. Large language models parrot things that they've read, but the word stochastic means they do it randomly, but according to a probability distribution. And I think it's a really good way to understand large language models. Real life parrots, for example, don't understand what they're saying either. They understand that when they repeat particular noises, they get rewarded, but they don't understand that there's meaning for the humans behind those noises, and large language models are that kind of a setup.
Interesting. Rick, you said the other day you'd heard someone describe ChatGPT as spicy autocomplete. And from what you've just said, I mean, it sounds very similar to the thing on your phone that just suggests the next word. It's just a heck of a lot better at it. So how does it learn those patterns and structures, that form? It feels a bit too real to just be, using a list of rules.
Yeah, so ChatGPT and large language models learn by absorbing existing language and finding patterns. What the creators have done is they've fed it with an enormous amount of existing language. Troves and troves of available English language text has been fed into the system. And from that, they've used machine learning algorithms to find patterns. And then using the patterns it's found, it's able to construct plausible responses to the prompts you give it. But without meaning, you're just being fooled by a computer program capable of passing the Turing test. There's a couple of really cool examples floating around. Ellie's going to chuck some links into the chat. Bookmark these if you can, because they're fantastic. But things like where they've asked ChatGPT to draw a circle, and it's produced a hexagon. And then they asked GPT to define a circle, and it gave the perfect textbook definition of what a circle is. So clearly, ChatGPT knows what a circle is. So they asked it again, okay, given what you've just told me, can you draw me a circle? And again, it produced a hexagon. They asked it then, okay, draw me a hexagon, and it produced a diamond. It doesn't know the meaning of the language. It knows the definition of circles, but it doesn't know the meaning of them. Maybe we should think of it as a 5-year-old reading university level geometry textbook. It's able to read the words, but not comprehend everything that it's talking about. There's another example too, where someone asked it to play a game of chess. If you enjoy playing chess, this is absolutely hilarious. It was quite happy to take turns listing moves because it's actually been fed millions and millions of games of chess. And so it understands the form of chess notation, but without knowing the meaning. It doesn't understand winning. And without understanding winning, it doesn't understand strategy. But if you watch the video, you'll see that it's completely and utterly clueless. It takes its own pieces. It replaces random pieces on the board. It follows.
I mean, this feels a bit like me playing chess with my son, to be honest,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
I'm ChatGPT.
You'll know things like the knight's move, where you move 2 forward and 1 sideways and all that kind of thing. But it'll do it for random pieces because it's absorbed all these forms, but not the meaning behind it. So large language models, great at form, but because they're good at it, and so good at it now in ChatGPT, that our fallible human brains start to ascribe meaning because it's so confident and so well written in the way it says something. We start to believe it. And we need to be very careful of what we expect of it. Some folks are even suggesting we need to tell people that ChatGPT will lie to them rather than trying to debate linguistics and how well it's producing content, just to remind people that it will lie to them because it's all about form and not about content.
Look, Rick, I think that's a great warning. I mean, as you know, I'm studying at the moment, and recently I thought, I can ask ChatGPT to help me find some articles on a topic I'm writing about. So I said to it, go and find me 5 recent academic papers on a particular health issue. And it dutifully spat out 5 really plausible looking references with, academic sounding titles and a list of authors. And the only problem was they were completely made up. When I went to look up the document object identifiers, they didn't exist, but they were in the form and linguistic style of real journal articles. But I know that there are some AI tools around in tech at the moment where I think form is actually far more important. Like ChatGPT, they've been taught the same way. They've been fed a massive amount of code so that they can create plausible blocks of code for developers. And certainly over the last 40 years in computing, the world has produced a lot of code. So there's a decent amount of learning material for the AI to absorb and find form from.
Yeah, that's become a bit of a legal and ethical question too. There's currently a case in the US against an AI tool made by Microsoft that offers code suggestions to software developers. Now, at face value, it feels like a really handy tool. Kath, you and I have done some pair programming. We've paired up to solve problems together where we share a screen, take turns using the keyboard, talk through the problem and come up with a solution to that. So if this case is going on, what's wrong with using an AI rather than another human being in pair programming?
It's an interesting point, Rick. I think it sounds like the tool you're talking about is CoPilot. And I have had a play with that, but I think one of our other developers who's been making more use of it could give us some greater insight. So let's invite Andy to join us. Rick, if you could just bring Andy in for us. And Andy, would you mind giving us an overview of CoPilot and how you use it in your work?
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Kath. Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me here. So CoPilot is a tool that, as the name suggests, is designed to work alongside developers and assist them with their programming. So it integrates directly into our development tools, and it works essentially as any autocomplete does. By sort of quietly suggesting the next words, characters, lines, or even whole functions based on what I'm currently doing. But that said, it is vastly different and vastly much more intelligent, I guess, than a normal autocomplete. So it uses the OpenAI Codex, which is the same platform that ChatGPT is built on, as well as the context of your existing code and what you're currently doing, to intelligently and often with very scary accuracy suggest what you're about to write and help you out. So I've been using CoPilot for about a year now, and I can confidently say that it has been a great time-saving tool, but definitely not without caveats. It integrates so seamlessly with my developer tools that I often forget that it's there. And I've just grown so used to it bringing up a suggestion and me hitting tab and moving on. That said, I have also learned to always review what it suggests though, because it can definitely make mistakes. And it's often actually quite hard to pick up the mistakes. It does such a good job of filling it out that what it does often looks right.
But it lies to you.
Sorry?
But it lies to you.
I know, it does. And that's the problem. It lies to you so well that you often forget that it is lying to you, or that it can lie to you, and that you actually have to think about what it's doing. So it took some time and a lot of experimenting to work out the sort of sweet spot that CoPilot is most useful in for me. While it can generate very large blocks of code for you, it doesn't generally have the bigger picture context or understanding to know what you're trying to do on a larger scale. So I'm going to let everyone in on a big developer secret here.
Oh, hang on. Have we cleared this secret with management?
No, but I think we have to let the people know. I think they deserve to. I'll take that chance.
Right.
So we as developers, we don't actually know everything. We spend a lot of time Googling for answers or looking up ways to do things online. There's simply just too much to remember. Yeah. But the reason that we have jobs is not to know from heart every bit of code that we write. We're paid because we know how to apply that knowledge and create something tangible from it. And CoPilot is a brilliant tool to help in this space. It really, really shines when you let it fill in little bits of code for you, whether it's just to save you time from writing monotonous lines of code, or as far as writing sort of small contained blocks of code for you, which perform a very specific function, which can save you a trip to Google and a few minutes searching for what you need. So CoPilot is a great assistant, but it's definitely not going to take our jobs anytime soon. As you mentioned earlier, Rick, these AI tools understand form, but not meaning. It can accurately infer what we're trying to do and does a really great job of generating specific bits of code to help with that. But it is a very long way from actually understanding the bigger picture of what we're trying to build.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so as Rick said, CoPilot is a large language model, and in fact, under the hood, it's using an engine created by the same people that wrote ChatGPT. It's just an older version. And the reason this has resulted in a legal case is that, as Andy said, it's learned what to suggest based on reading other people's code that's copyright, even if it's released as open source. And the question before the courts is whether it's allowable under current copyright laws to use someone else's code in this manner. Is it fair use? And there are even clear cases where a specific prompt has resulted in CoPilot, rather than generating its own predictive answer based on many things, has just spat out entire slabs of code unchanged from a single author. And all of this is happening without attribution to any of the original sources.
Yeah, I get why that's causing a problem. And I thinking through it, I wonder then, who owns the copyright on my software if it's full of code written by an AI? Like, does the AI own that code? Does the original author that it's regurgitating have somehow own some of my code? But even harder to answer, and I guess this is one of the big questions with this kind of large language model, is if it's giving me code based on what it's ingested and learned from thousands of other human authors, do those thousands of people now own some level of copyright in my code?
The whole internet owns your program, Rick.
Yeah, I guess the same questions surely apply to ChatGPT. Like, if I use ChatGPT to write a blog post, does the AI own the copyright on that? Do the original authors whose work was used to train the model? And if all I did was ask it to write an article for me, it feels like the person with the least claim to copyright is me. Like, Kath, I've got open source code out there. Please don't look for it. I'm sure it's terrible.
No, do look, Ellie, if we can get a link in it. No, that's all right.
Look, I'm sure it's terrible. It's 20 years old. It was released under a license that allows other people to use it in their code. That's what we do with open source software. But the license that it's under is what we call a contagious license. In other words, my license says that if you use my code in your code, then your code also becomes open source.
Yep.
It's one of the principles of some of the open source licenses. And I know that when I wrote my code, I didn't grant permission to include it in a data set for an AI bot to regurgitate. I mean, that was 20 years ago. It was so far out of, the likelihood that, nobody's doing that. So I didn't grant that permission, and I'm not sure I'm completely comfortable that it's doing that.
Yeah, Rick, and I think you're not alone. I know it's a question that Anthony, who's another of our technology leaders at Portable, has also been giving some thought to. And I'd like to invite Anthony to join us, because it seems like this is a really interesting ethical as well as legal copyright question. And Anthony, you've been thinking about it a lot recently, but just reiterating, if there's one thing we'd like people to go away with today, it's food for thought. And we may not all agree, but we'd love to hear everyone's perspectives. And for those of you in the chat joining us, please note down your thoughts. I'd encourage you not to jump to any conclusions too quickly, but engage in some discussion. And don't forget to keep popping those questions in the Q&A when we get to them later. So Anthony, over to you.
Thanks, Kat. And like most people, my position on this is still developing. I'm a human after all, and my opinions are based on the very limited information that fits in this tiny brain of mine. Basically, though, I don't think we're meaningfully stealing anyone's code here. The code was already in the public domain, and all CoPilot did was just get it in front of me sooner than if I'd manually researched the problem. Now, I believe the software we write is important. The software we write makes the world a better place. And any tool that can allow me to write better software quicker is incrementally making the world a better place. Now, in addition to that, and I feel more strongly about this, I think there's a limited number of issues that I can focus on at any one time. Right now, I'll worry about climate change. I'll worry about what socks I'm going to wear tomorrow. And I don't think I've got the capacity to worry about the ethics of using a tool like CoPilot. Now, I know there's currently potential legal issues with the provisions of services like CoPilot, but I don't believe there's any legal issues for us, the users of CoPilot. And I feel strongly that whatever the outcome of these legal issues are, the big tech companies who own these AI models will find ways to set up those services to deliver them without any legal issues.
Sorry, Anthony, just jumping in there if I can. I do wonder, and I'm not expecting you to have an answer for this, but I do wonder if the big companies will do it anyway, given Microsoft, the company behind CoPilot, they've got 40 years of code that they've produced in-house. Why didn't they train it on the code they already had?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I don't know whether Microsoft did this, and I don't know whether you ever had a look at the Microsoft Windows code base that got leaked onto the internet a few years ago. I'm not sure whether you want any of that code on your code base. But I guess they could have. And that's I think in future perhaps they will. AWS's version of this tool, Code Whisperer, they've used it on their internal code bases. Now I suspect AWS's code bases are a little more modern than Microsoft's. But I'm confident that they'll find a way to make this work, whether that's by using their internal code bases, maybe that's by using some sort of consent mechanism on open source software. I think they will find a way.
Okay. I just want to pull Andy back in, because clearly as he's been using this tool, you've probably had a think and got a position on this. So going to be blunt, are you stealing other people's code when you use CoPilot? Have you stolen Rick's code?
No, I haven't. And judging from what Rick said before, I don't know if I want to be stealing Rick's code.
Ouch!
sorry. No, look, I mean, CoPilot shouldn't be copying other people's code verbatim. That's not how it works. It learns from a massive collection of code to probabilistically suggest what should come next. Now, as Kath mentioned earlier, like there are lawsuits. It doesn't always work out that way, but ideally, that's what it does. So, I mean, I I think of it as sort of just telling me the same information that I could get from Googling something and helping me to implement it in a suitable way in my code, but it just does it way quicker than what I could and saves me a bunch of time.
Thanks, Andy. Look, there's a lot of great input on chat. I've just seen a few messages pop up there, and I'm really looking forward to having a read back through it when we finish. So keep it going. Please also remember to use the Q&A button there if you want us to speak further on any part of what we're talking about today. At the end, there will be a few minutes, I'm sure, for us to jump into some of that Q&A. I think there's a few perspectives in there that we've heard, Kath, and I think we'll leave that one a bit unanswered. It feels like a question that needs further thought. And so let's move on. One question that comes to mind from it, though, is a bit cheeky. We hired people, you and I have been involved in hiring developers here at Portable. We hire people to write code. Is it okay that they're now getting CoPilot to write the code that we hired them to write?
That's a very interesting question, Rick. I'm going to answer you with a parable. So there's a story of a dev who was contracted to produce some code to a specific set of requirements, and his contract just said, this is what the software needs to do. So he went, all right, got a fix for this. Without telling his employer, he went and hired an offshore team to do the actual code writing and spent his days sitting on the internet downloading cat videos. And in his mind, he produced the code that did what it needed to do, and he fulfilled his contract, and it was all good, right?
Well, isn't that, though, essentially what's happening here? You know, from what we're hearing from Andy and Anthony is if you're using CoPilot, it's writing code. You know, you could go and sit on a beach somewhere.
Andy, are you
not sitting on a beach anywhere, Rick?
Oh, sorry, Andy, I forgot you're still here.
CoPilot's writing the boring bits for me. I'm not taking advantage of it so that I can go and relax. It's simply letting me do the more complex and more interesting parts of my job. It's removing the mundane bits, the bits that take time that a monkey could do, and it's making me more productive as a programmer. Really, it just lets me focus on the bigger picture while it does all the little bits for me.
All right, thanks, Andy. So, the three of us are into woodworking. So let me ask you, are you still doing woodworking if you use a CNC machine, so robot rather than power tools to make your cuts? And are you still doing woodworking if you use a table saw rather than a hand saw? From everything that Andy's just said, this is a tool that's helped him to be more productive rather than being lazy. And just back to our ingeniously lazy cat video developer, when he was found out, it wasn't who wrote the code that was what got him into trouble. So just as Al Capone was done for tax evasion rather than for being a gangster, this dev was fired because he shared his security tokens with an unauthorized third party, the offshore devs.
That'll do it. So the woodworking thing for me is a good analogy. The tools that we're using there are just helping us to do the actual work. And of course, Andy really is still doing great work. For folks who are joining us today, I'd like to give Andy a quick shout out for the work he's done on Amico, a tool we built for couples who are separating. It uses artificial intelligence, not a large language model. It uses a form of artificial intelligence to compare a separating couples situation against thousands of previous agreements in its model. And it gives them suggestions for how their assets should be split. So some fantastic work there. Thanks, Andy, for your work there. And just a note, of course, we actually have a real lawyer who does a QA review of every suggested split that the AI provides. The AI, once again, being a tool to achieve the outcome.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. And I think, look, now's probably a really good time to just talk briefly to how we use AI in our work at Portable, because there are concerns, as we've seen, and we need to acknowledge that. So I want to be clear that at the moment, Portable as an organisation doesn't have a stance one way or the other on using AI in doing our jobs. We're in explore mode. People like Andy who are using AI tools are being public and transparent about that, and they're sharing their experiences back to the wider team, and that will ultimately help to inform a position in the future as an organisation.
So my next question, Kath, is can we get CoPilot to do all the work? Will CoPilot become just pilot at some stage? And look, to put it as bluntly as possible, is AI going to steal my job? Is it going to steal the job of our friends in chat today? Are our jobs at risk from AI? A few weeks back when we were reflecting on today and what we'd be talking about, you mentioned generational languages in computer science. Now, we're going to get real nerdy in this when we talk about
Love getting nerdy.
Generational languages, but I'd love it if you could just talk us through what you mean by generational languages, and then your insight there, and whether it answers the question of whether AI is going to steal our jobs.
Sure, Rick. I mean, I think it really comes down to what you believe that your job is. So at the moment here at Portable, I primarily write code using a PHP framework called Laravel. And I've even been introduced as one of our Laravel developers. But I think what Portable pays me to do is the creative thinking of what we want done and instructing the computer to do that. And the way that we instruct the computer is something that has evolved ever since we first started using computers. Initially with ones and zeros using machine language, or what's known as the first generation language. That then evolved to assembly languages, which used some letters in place of those ones and zeros to make it easier. And then third generation languages that were more widely familiar today, such as C, C++, and Java. And then fourth generation languages like PHP and Python. And Rick, I'd put it to you that large language models like CoPilot simply represent the next evolution of programming language, a fifth generation language, if you like, based on natural language. And if we look back at every point in that history of generational languages, there was a significant cohort of programmers using the earlier generation languages that felt threatened by the evolution. And they felt like, oh, not going to have programmers anymore. Anybody will be able to write code. And I mean, look, what actually happened is that we still needed programmers. Programmers just became more efficient, and it was easier for them to solve more complex problems.
Thanks, Kath. That's absolutely fascinating view of the future of computer languages and where we've come from there. And I wonder how long it'll be before we reach that level of trust in what you're calling fifth generation computer languages, that we can just let it get on with things. I imagine that the programmers of the past, when we got to assembly language, were did they trust it to turn it into the proper ones and zeros at first, or did they review all the ones and zeros to make sure it was okay? Will large language models, and I suspect they will large language models in CoPilot get to the point where Andy can just trust that it's giving him the code that he needs? It'll be an interesting future there. Ultimately, though, the center of what you're talking about is a human who's driving each of those levels of abstraction away from the ones and zeros. Kath, yep. I'm going to go on record here. I think I'm going to go on record here and say that that person's job's not in danger, at least not from large language models. After all, as we said at the start, they understand the form, but not the meaning. There's no intelligence in their response beyond being able to construct something plausible based on what it's previously read. We as humans, we bring the meaning, and that's not in danger from large language models.
No, I absolutely agree with you, Rick. I don't think there's an automated replacement for engineering creativity coming down the pipes anytime soon. And our jobs are just as much about imagining and designing complex systems than being about punching ones and zeros into a computer, or punch cards for those of us old enough to remember that.
Yeah, look, it'd be great to be able to say to an AI, write an invoicing system and have it fully working, fully integrated into the product that we're building. Like, the reality is that even as we live in a world of fourth and even fifth generation languages, we still need analysts to bring the meaning. We still need people who understand the systems that we are building, or at least to have the intelligence to find the questions and get the right answers. You know, to build an invoicing system requires understanding, not just being able to regurgitate tax law and accounting practices. You know, it's not a simple task, and our technical team do that every. You know, I was being a bit facetious before when we were talking about hiring, because when we hire, we're looking more for the ability to ask the right questions and to create the right solutions than we are for people's ability to write code in a specific language. Yeah, when we're looking at people's code, we're looking at how they solve things in terms of the patterns they used rather than the characters that they typed on the computer. So a new generation of languages that comes from large language models is certainly coming. It's a tide that won't be stopped, but it won't be intelligent enough to take our jobs where we provide the meaning. It's just going to optimize the boring bits that are form.
Absolutely. And Rick, this has been a fascinating topic to explore with you. So thank you, and thank you to our guests, Sandy and Anthony. I haven't been able to keep an eye on chat as much as I'd like to, but really looking forward to reading that back. But Rick, let's check in and see what we can find in the Q&A, and we might bring back Andy and Anthony too, if anyone's got questions for them.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of questions here in chat, and I'm going to ask this first one because I like this question just as a bit of a prompt. Unfortunately, it's from an anonymous attendee. But we said at the start that ChatGPT, we should talk about as lying to you. Does it know that it's lying?
Ooh, does anyone want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I think it doesn't know that it's lying. There was a pretty famous case recently, just a few weeks ago, I think it was, where Microsoft's new Bing AI tool, which is essentially ChatGPT under the hood. So basically, Bing launched a new AI tool to help you, to assist you when you're doing web searches. And someone had a conversation with it, I think, where they asked it the date or something. And this was only a few weeks ago, so very much in 2023. And the Bing assistant insisted that it was 2022. And even when it went back and forth a few times between the users saying, no, I'm very sure that it's 2023.
2023.
The assistant even went as far as gaslighting them and telling them to stop wasting their time because they know that they're lying. They know that the real person is lying and telling them the wrong date and trying to trick them. So, I mean, either they're truly evil and they've gained sentience, or more likely they don't actually know they're lying. They're very confident, but they don't know that they're lying.
See, I find it interesting that we continue to use words like confident and know, because I think you could stop that question as, does ChatGPT know? Does it know anything? What is knowing? And it's the same as the form versus meaning. I don't think it knows anything at all. It doesn't know right. It doesn't know wrong. It just knows the next word that you probably want to read.
Yeah. I would agree. I'd agree with that, Kath. I think that's a good reflection. That it requires actual intelligence to understand, you know, that you're lying. The interesting thing is, though, are you lying if you don't understand the concept of lying? Like, if you don't understand the meaning of lying, if it's just a word, is it still lying? And I think if you read the article that Ellie posted in the chat a bit earlier around this, it's more about positioning what ChatGPT is telling people who might not be going into the depths of understanding what a large language model is, and need a shortcut to understand what we're trying to say about trusting the content of it. And that's why there's a suggestion of using the word lying, because it's a word that everybody understands the meaning of, even if there's no actual intention to lie or anything, because it doesn't even understand the concept there. Question from Sarah here. What do you think the reliance of tech like CoPilot will have on those who don't have existing code skills? Will it prevent them from learning better coding, and will they even see the flaws? Anthony, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think that's 100% a valid point. I think someone put on the chat before that they're not a programmer, but they could get ChatGPT to write a simple program for them. And I've seen a lot of people do that, where it pulls a little program that calls an API and then formats the results in a nice way for you to see. And I think it works really well for that. But if you don't have a good understanding of software architecture, I think that you could get yourself in a real mess by relying too much on ChatGPT to structure your code and put the things in the right place, and put all the logic in the right place. And I think over time, I'm not sure whether those systems will be maintainable. I suspect you'd need to rewrite. You'd have to ask ChatGPT to rewrite the software every single time you had to do a change to it, I suspect.
There's an interesting line, I think, there. I'll just ask the panels, thoughts on this. There's an interesting line between asking ChatGPT to write some from the Bureau of Meteorology API. And that's all it does. It's just a script that you run when you turn on your computer that pops up and says, "Good morning, Rick. Today will be 21 degrees and mostly sunny," versus not knowing code and the architecture, as you're talking about, Anthony, to build entire parts of a complex system. But am I on the right track there?
Yeah, I think you put it much more eloquently than I did. Yep. I think one of the most important things that we bring to building a software system is working out which parts need to go where. And I don't think ChatGPT is any good at doing that.
I think
using CoPilot, you're using it to solve to write the code for this small bit where you are telling it exactly where to put the code and exactly, what kind of code you want.
Yeah, exactly. The code that I get to write is either just single lines or at most a bit of code that performs one and only one function. And so I'm not asking it to look at any bigger picture stuff. I'm literally just giving it a task. I know what I want out of it, and I'm just asking it to solve that for me.
Rick, I think to go a bit more back to Sarah's question of, which I interpreted as essentially, how's this going to affect junior developers or people entering the industry? That I would say I have a great amount of optimism that it will be a helpful teaching tool. I know I've also started using CoPilot in my work at Portable, and I've found one of the ways I've learnt and grown as a developer over the last 23 years is by reading other people's code. And primarily that's been in terms of pull requests, code reviews, but having something suggest code to me, I'm like, oh, hadn't thought of doing it that way. Well, that's an interesting function. I'll go and look that up. And so I don't see that it's necessarily going to be a hindrance. No, I think it could be quite helpful in a junior developer's professional trajectory.
Yeah. I've changed my view on that over the last 20 years, Kath. When JavaScript frameworks first started coming out, people were learning the JavaScript framework and not JavaScript. And I was very concerned at the time that people wouldn't understand how to, how the code actually worked, because they were just using this this framework, this library over the top of the actual work. And I was not, I didn't think that was a good idea. But in recent time, I would agree. I think, you know, if you use a JavaScript framework or a JavaScript library, it makes things easier for you, but you still end up learning all the bits that you need to from the actual language underneath. And I think it does give you know, new developers a bit of a leg up. I'll jump on to the next question. And Anthony, I might throw this one at you. This is from Dylan. Does the inefficiency of large language models concern you? And I'm throwing this at you because you mentioned climate change is one of the things, along with your socks, that keeps you worried. The energy usage, both in training the model and inference, is immense. We've identified climate as an existential crisis. Does glorified autocomplete justify the carbon dioxide emissions?
Yeah, good point. I think that's a really good point. I don't think it's more important than working out how we can end Bitcoin mining, because I think that I'm pretty sure that's using up more power than large language models. But yep, I 100% agree. We need to be careful of that. Andy and I doubling our carbon emissions by using CoPilot. That is something I've not thought enough about. It's a really good point.
A real yes/no question here too from Peter. If you use CoPilot, are you sharing the code that you're writing? Could you be risking your company's own proprietary info? Andy, this is probably a question for you, being the most experienced CoPilot here.
Sure. So CoPilot, I mean, it's really up to the tool that you're using, but CoPilot does let you choose whether or not it's able to anonymously share some of your code back to them. So you can choose to turn that off. So I think CoPilot always shares anonymous telemetry just on your general usage patterns and that sort of thing. But you can disable the actual sharing of any code that you write. So you can avoid that situation.
Is that an opt-in or an opt-out there, Andy?
I can't remember. I know it is quite publicly stated on the website. They're not trying to hide it, but I'm not sure if it's opt-in or opt-out.
Yeah. And it's probably worth mentioning here too, for people that aren't using CoPilot but are looking at ChatGPT, that ChatGPT have also got information on their website about what they use from the information you give it. So if you give it, you know, proprietary information and ask it to summarize it, what happens to that proprietary information? There's information on their website about opting in and out of, once again, it's more, it doesn't learn from what you give it, according to the website, but the people who wrote ChatGPT are able to read the prompts that you gave it, so they have access to that there, unless you opt out. So if that does concern you, then check the rules, check the interface for both ChatGPT, CoPilot, or any other AI tools you use, and just check what they're going to be doing with the information that you're putting into it. Nicole asks regarding copyright, and just I want to caveat that we are not copyright lawyers, we just play them on television. Regarding copyright, what if the AI learns to decompile APKs or compiled code that is online? I'll throw an example in here, like the App Store, whether it's the Google or the Apple App Store. If it downloads the compiled code and then runs a decompiler on it and then learns from that, this is not code that was intentionally public, but what happens then? Have we got any thoughts as to whether there's any problems with that? Any opinion to do that? Go for it, Kath.
I'd like to talk to that one. And I think that is a large box of spiders that would be overshadowed by a greater question of, in this scenario, the AI has almost become a runaway agent, and we're saying that the AI has, off its own bat, gone and decompiled this software. So clearly that's wrong. is the AI now considered a sentient being? Is it prosecutable? How do we, like, who is the malicious agent behind the action to go and decompile and get access to? Yeah, exactly. Skynet. Thank you, chat. But I do think, yeah, when we start to ask those sorts of questions, we're in a next generation of these tools where there is intelligence behind the spicy autocomplete. And that is, I don't know, a copyright would almost be at the bottom of the barrel of my concerns there. I would be starting to get very concerned about intent and how they're acting freely in the world with us. There was an experiment done a little while ago that used the ChatGPT engine, but the researchers got a hold of that to run in their own platform without any of the constraints that the public one has. And they set it up with a computer with access to the internet and ways to interact with the world, and gave it a task. I'm not sure what the task was. And it went about doing that until it hit this roadblock of a captcha that it needed to circumvent to continue on its task.
So capture is that annoying thing that's like type these weird characters or click on all.
Yes. Yeah. So it, given that it had been given an internet connection and presumably I think some money as well, it had been given access to some resources. It went out on like Fiverr or one of those task platforms, claiming to be a blind pensioner that needed human help to bypass this captcha and paid somebody to complete the captcha for it. And I think that's terrifying.
That is terrifying. Oh dear. Hopefully, yeah, Skynet's not too close. We might wrap up with one more question here, and I think there's a good question, and I'm going to just pause halfway into it though. It was mentioned that tools like CoPilot are fed all sorts of code, good and bad. So I'm just going to pause there and just ask us to reflect a bit on the fact that yes, it's absorbed. I mean, I'm first one to admit that the code that it's probably absorbed of mine, probably not great code. Luckily, it's in Perl, and not a lot of people are writing Perl these days, so it's not really going to be doing anybody too much of a disservice. But what's the implication of the fact it's learning from bad code as much as good code?
I mean, I think in an ideal world, we'd have it only learning from good code. But I guess one, it's very hard to get a huge, wide range of good code that you can feed into it. It makes sense to use such a massive public repository like GitHub to train these tools. But then also good can also be very subjective. There's certainly, you can certainly write objectively bad code, but there are many ways to solve. There's infinite ways to solve problems in programming, and most of them are fine. So it's very, very difficult to actually define what is good and bad code.
Yeah, I assume for CoPilot to work, you have to presume that the preponderance of all code available to it was good code. And to Tone's point before, maybe that's why Microsoft didn't use it on their internal code. The end of Michael's question is, do you see somebody making a CoPilot equivalent that's only been fed good code? I mean, Andy, you're saying it's difficult to tell what good code is, but do we think there might be something coming down the line that actually does make a value judgment on the code before it absorbs it?
I think there's... Sorry, you go, Kat.
No, you go, Tone.
It doesn't it record which it records which answers we take. So I think it automatically learns over time when it gives us rubbish code. we say don't use this code, over time it'll learn not to recommend that. So I think it already does that to a degree based on how we use it. Am I wrong with that, Andy?
I'm not. I think you're right, but I don't know on what scale. I don't know if that's just locally sort of stored information or if that actually gets fed back into the data model. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I thought it did, but I'm not sure. So it's possible, Rick, that your code is not being used, unfortunately. Maybe it got rejected a few times and now it never gets suggested. Oh, maybe we have to investigate that further.
Oh dear. I
All
worry.
right. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. And so I just want to again say a huge thank you to everyone that's joined us. Thanks to Rick, my co-host, and our panelists, Andy and Anthony. And shout out to our facilitators in chat, Ellie and Madison. So just remember that anyone who registered for today's event will get an email link to the recording. Feel free to share that with your friends. And we hope that as you're going about the rest of your day, you'll be thinking through what we've talked about today. And like we kept saying, our hope is that we've given you some material for reflection and discussion, not brought down these are the answers, because we don't have them. And as I said at the start, this is the second in a series of 3 Portable talks on ChatGPT and AI. And in our third session, Portable Presents Informed AI, we'll be exploring the impact of AI in the legal space with Portable's justice team and a number of industry-leading guests. So if you're interested in this and Portable's other upcoming events, please make sure to visit the Portable website and sign up for our newsletter. Ellie and Madison are putting those links in the chat at the moment, and you will also receive that information along with the email containing the recording of today's event. So thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Oh.
Thank you.